Hi, I'm Natalie. 8 months pregnant, I walked into what I thought was a family dinner and heard my sister-in-law tell my husband, the baby should be born at my house. That way, we can say it's mine from the start. My blood turned to ice when Derek nodded and said, "That actually makes sense, Van." I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand instinctively protecting my belly, realizing the two people I trusted most had been planning to steal my child. What happened next changed everything, and I'm still shaking as I tell you this story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain pelted against the windshield as Derek drove us through the familiar streets of Riverside toward his mother's house. I pressed my palm against the car window, watching the droplets race down the glass, my other hand resting on my swollen belly, where Lucas kicked restlessly. Something felt different about Derek tonight. He'd been unusually quiet during the drive, stealing glances at me through the rearview mirror when he thought I wasn't looking. "You're nervous about dinner," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Your mom makes the same pot roast every Sunday. It's not like we haven't done this before." Derek's knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. "It's not just dinner tonight, Nat. Vanessa has some ideas she wants to discuss. About the baby." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October weather. Vanessa, Derek's sister-in-law, had been increasingly involved in our pregnancy over the past few months. At first, I'd thought it was sweet how excited she was about becoming an aunt. She'd bought clothes, offered to help set up the nursery, even insisted on coming to several of my doctor appointments. But lately, her enthusiasm felt more like possession. "What kind of ideas?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Derek pulled into the driveway of the sprawling two-story house on Maple Ridge Drive. Even through the rain, I could see every light blazing, making the place look like something from a magazine spread. Vanessa and Marcus had money, the kind that came from her successful real estate business and his position at the bank. Their house always made our modest apartment on Cedar Street feel inadequate by comparison. "Let's just hear what she has to say," Derek replied, avoiding my question entirely. The front door opened before we even reached the porch. Vanessa stood there beaming, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, wearing a flowing dress that looked suspiciously like maternity wear, though she wasn't pregnant. She'd been trying for years, going through multiple rounds of fertility treatments that had drained their savings and left her desperate for a child. "There's my beautiful sister," she cooed, pulling me into a hug that lasted too long and felt too tight. Her hands lingered on my belly in a way that made my skin crawl. "How's our little angel doing today?" "Our little angel." The possessive language sent another wave of unease through me, but I forced a smile. "He's been active all day. I think he knows something's different." "Babies are so intuitive." Carol, Derek's mother, chimed in from the hallway. She appeared with her arms already extended for her own belly-focused hug. "They can sense when important decisions are being made." "Important decisions." I looked at Derek, but he was already following Marcus into the living room, leaving me surrounded by the two women who seemed to know something I didn't. Dinner felt like a performance where everyone knew their lines except me. The conversation flowed around topics that skirted the edges of something bigger. Vanessa mentioned how the spare bedroom upstairs would make a perfect nursery. Carol talked about how wonderful it would be to have a grandchild living so close. Marcus nodded along with everything, occasionally glancing at Derek with what looked like understanding. I picked at my pot roast, my appetite gone. Lucas seemed to sense my tension, pressing against my ribs until I had to shift uncomfortably in my chair. Every few minutes, Vanessa would reach over to touch my belly, making comments about preparing for the big day and making sure everything goes smoothly. "Natalie looks tired," Carol observed, studying my face with concern that felt calculated. The commute to Portland must be exhausting at this stage of pregnancy. All that stress can't be good for the baby. "The apartment stairs are getting harder too," Vanessa added sympathetically. "Third-floor walk-up with no elevator. I worry about you climbing those every day." I set down my fork, the pieces finally clicking together. "What are you all trying to say?" Derek cleared his throat, finally meeting my eyes. "We've been talking, And we think it might be better if you stayed here for the last few weeks, until the baby comes. Better for who? The question came out sharper than I intended. For everyone, Vanessa answered smoothly. I've been reading about home births, and there are so many advantages. More comfortable, more natural, less medical intervention. Plus, I could help take care of you both afterward. My hand instinctively moved to protect my belly. I'm having Lucas at Riverside General. We already have everything arranged with Dr. Henley. Hospitals are so impersonal, Carol said with a dismissive wave. Vanessa has done extensive research. She even found a midwife who specializes in natural births. A midwife who's very discreet, Vanessa added, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. I looked around the table at their expectant faces, all watching me like I was supposed to agree to something I didn't understand. Discreet about what? The silence stretched until Derek finally spoke. Nat, Vanessa can't have children. You know how hard she's tried, how much money they've spent. This could be a solution that helps everyone. What kind of solution? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes bright with an intensity that scared me. If the baby is born here, at my house, with my midwife attending, then legally he could be registered as mine. No one would ever have to know the truth except us. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling like the floor was falling away beneath me. You want to steal my baby? Not steal, Derek said quickly. Share. Think about it, Nat. Vanessa and Marcus can provide things we can't. Private schools, college funds, opportunities. Lucas would have everything. Lucas would have me, I said, my voice growing stronger. His mother. You'd still be in his life, Vanessa assured me, reaching across the table to pat my hand. Like a favorite aunt, you could visit whenever you wanted, but he'd have stability, security, a real future. I pulled my hand away from her touch. You're all insane. Marcus spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. It's not insane, Natalie, it's practical. Vanessa's been preparing for this pregnancy as much as you have. She's read every book, taken every class, bought everything a baby could need. She's ready to be a mother. She's not his mother. I am. I struggled to stand, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Derek, tell them this is crazy. But Derek wouldn't meet my eyes. Maybe we should at least consider it. For Lucas's sake. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My husband, the man who'd held my hand through morning sickness and painted the nursery in our apartment, was seriously considering giving away our child. I looked around the table at their faces, all waiting for me to see reason, to understand that they knew what was best for my baby better than I did. I need some air, I managed to say, backing away from the table. Natalie, don't be dramatic, Carol called after me. We're just exploring options. I didn't stop walking until I reached the front porch, where the cold October air hit my face like a slap. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, not sure who to call or what to say. How do you explain that your family wants to steal your baby? Who would believe such a thing? The front door opened behind me and Derek stepped out, his face a mixture of guilt and determination.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Nat, come back inside. Let's talk about this rationally. Rationally? I turned to face him, tears streaming down my cheeks. Our son isn't a business transaction, Derek. He's our child. He could have a better life with them, Derek said quietly. We're barely making ends meet. The apartment is too small, your job doesn't have great maternity benefits, and my construction work isn't steady. Vanessa and Marcus can give him stability. What about love? I asked. What about the fact that I'm carrying him, that I've been talking to him and singing to him and dreaming about him for 8 months? Derek's face softened slightly. You'd still love him. But maybe love isn't enough. Those words cut deeper than anything Vanessa had said. I stared at the man I'd married, wondering when he'd become a stranger. If you really believe that, then you don't know me at all. I started walking down the driveway, not caring that I had no car and nowhere to go. The rain had picked up again, soaking through my sweater within minutes, but I kept walking. Behind me, I could hear Derek calling my name, but I didn't turn around. My phone buzzed with a text message. I pulled it out, expecting Derek, but it was from Vanessa. Think about what's best for Lucas. We can make this work for everyone. I deleted the message and kept walking. The streets of Riverside blurred together as I wandered aimlessly, my mind racing. How long had they been planning this? Had Derek been in on it from the beginning, or had Vanessa slowly convinced him over time? I thought about all her visits, all her offers to help, all her comments about our baby. The signs had been there, but I dismissed them as enthusiasm from a woman desperate to be a mother. My feet led me instinctively toward downtown, past the closed shops and empty restaurants. The rain soaked through my clothes, and Lucas kicked restlessly, as if he could sense my distress. I found myself standing in front of the bus stop, staring at the schedule without really seeing it. A car pulled up behind me, headlights cutting through the darkness. For a moment, I hoped it might be Derek, coming to apologize and take me home. Instead, Vanessa stepped out of her silver BMW, holding an umbrella. "Natalie, you're soaking wet," she said, approaching me with what looked like genuine concern. "Get in the car. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out," I said without turning around. "Lucas is my baby." "He could be our baby," Vanessa said softly. "I know it's a lot to process, but think about it. I've been preparing for this pregnancy alongside you. I've felt every milestone, celebrated every ultrasound. In my heart, I'm already his mother." I finally turned to look at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes that I'd missed before. This wasn't just about wanting a child. This was about a woman who'd convinced herself that my baby was rightfully hers. "You've been planning this for months, haven't you?" I asked. Vanessa didn't deny it. "I saw how you and Derek were struggling. The money stress, the small apartment, Derek's uncertainty about being a father. I knew I could provide better. Marcus and I started thinking about it after your 20-week ultrasound. When we found out it was a boy. And Derek, when did you convince him?" "Derek wants what's best for his son," Vanessa said carefully. "It took some time for him to see the advantages, but he came around. The betrayal was complete. My husband hadn't just agreed to this plan, he'd been actively convinced of it over months of manipulation. I felt utterly alone, standing in the rain with my unborn child, facing a family conspiracy I never could have imagined. "I'll never agree to this," I said firmly. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "You might not have a choice, Natalie. If Derek supports the plan, if we can demonstrate that Marcus and I can provide a better environment for Lucas, there are legal ways to make this happen." The threat was subtle but clear. I thought about our modest savings, our basic health insurance, Derek's construction wages versus Marcus's bank salary, and Vanessa's real estate income. In a custody battle, they might actually win. "You'd take me to court?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the rain. "I'd do whatever it takes to give that baby the life he deserves," Vanessa said. "But it doesn't have to be adversarial. We can make this a family decision. You'd be part of his life, just not as his legal mother." I stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the calculating woman behind the caring facade. She'd been playing a long game, slowly positioning herself to claim my child while making it seem like the logical choice. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Derek. "Come home, Nat. Let's talk." But home felt like a trap now. How could I go back to our apartment, sleep in our bed, pretend everything was normal, when my husband had already decided our child belonged to someone else? "I need time to think," I told Vanessa. "Of course," she said, sounding relieved that I wasn't outright refusing. "But don't take too long. The baby could come any day now, and we need to have everything arranged." She got back in her car and drove away, leaving me alone at the bus stop. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for someone I could trust, someone who might help me figure out what to do next. My finger hovered over Dr. Henley's number. She was the one person in this situation who had only my and Lucas's well-being in mind. But it was nearly 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, and calling her would mean admitting how desperate things had become. Instead, I found myself walking toward the one place that had always felt safe. Helen Morrison lived 3 blocks from our apartment in a small cottage that seemed untouched by time. She'd been my neighbor when I first moved to Riverside, taking me under her wing when I was a scared 22-year-old starting over in a new town. Even after Derek and I moved to the apartment, I'd kept in touch with Helen, stopping by for tea and conversation whenever life felt overwhelming. Her porch light was still on when I approached the cottage, and I could see the warm glow of lamps through her front windows. I hesitated at the garden gate, suddenly aware of how I must look, soaked to the skin and obviously distressed. But before I could change my mind, the front door opened. "Natalie?" Helen's voice carried across the small yard. "Honey, what are you doing out in this weather?" I broke down then, all the fear and betrayal and confusion pouring out in ugly sobs that shook my whole body. Helen didn't ask questions. She simply wrapped her cardigan around my shoulders and guided me into her warm, cluttered living room. "Let's get you dry first," she said, disappearing into her bedroom and returning with a soft robe and thick socks. "Then you can tell me what's happened." As I changed in her bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My face was pale and streaked with tears, my hair plastered to my head from the rain. I looked like someone who was falling apart, which wasn't far from the truth. Helen had made tea by the time I emerged, the kind of strong, sweet brew that fixed everything in her world. We sat in her living room, surrounded by decades of memories and the kind of comfortable clutter that spoke of a life well lived. "Now," she said gently, "tell me what's brought you to my door looking like you've seen a ghost." I told her everything. The dinner conversation, Vanessa's plan, Derek's betrayal, the legal threats. Helen listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "That woman is trying to steal your baby," Helen said when I finished, her voice sharp with indignation. "She thinks she's doing what's best for him," I said weakly. "Nonsense," Helen snapped. "She's doing what's best for her, and your husband is a fool if he can't see that." The validation felt like a lifeline. For hours, I'd been surrounded by people telling me that giving up my child was reasonable, logical, even generous. Helen was the first person to call it what it was: theft. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "If Derek supports her, if they take me to court, I might lose. They have money, stability, everything a judge would want to see." Helen set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "They have things, Natalie. Things aren't the same as being a mother. You've carried that baby for 8 months. You've loved him since the moment you knew he existed. That matters more than bank accounts and big houses." "But what if it doesn't? What if the system decides they're right?" Helen was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the lamplight. "Then we make sure you're not fighting this battle alone," she said finally. "You need a lawyer, someone who specializes in family law. And you need to document everything that's happened tonight. Every conversation, every threat, every manipulation." "I can't afford a lawyer," I said. "There are lawyers who work for people who can't afford them," Helen replied. "And there are ways to fight back that don't require money. What you need first is to get somewhere safe, somewhere they can't pressure you or manipulate you into signing anything." "Where would I go?" "Derek and I share everything. The apartment, the bank account, the car." Helen smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "You could stay here in my guest room. It's small, but it's yours for as long as you need it." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that I started crying again. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering. That's what neighbors do for each other." As I sat in Helen's cozy living room, feeling the first spark of hope I'd experienced all night, my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But avoiding him wouldn't solve anything. "Where are you?" Derek's voice was strained. "It's been hours, Nat. I'm worried sick." "I'm safe," I said simply. "Come home, please. We need to talk about this like adults." Like adults? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Adults don't plot to steal babies, Derek. Nobody's stealing anything. Vanessa just wants to help. Vanessa wants my child, and you're helping her take him. There was a long pause. Maybe we should take a break from this conversation until you're thinking more clearly. The condescension in his voice was the final straw. I'm thinking very clearly. Clearly enough to see that you've already chosen her over me. I hung up and turned off my phone. Helen was watching me with an expression of quiet support. That felt good, didn't it? She asked. Terrifying, I admitted. But yes, it felt good. Tomorrow we start fighting back, Helen said firmly. Tonight, you rest. That baby needs you strong. As I settled into Helen's guest bed, surrounded by the faint scent of lavender and the sound of rain against the windows, I felt Lucas moving restlessly inside me. I placed both hands on my belly and whispered to him the way I had every night for months. It's okay, baby boy. Mama's here. Mama's gonna protect you. For the first time in hours, he settled into stillness, as if my voice alone was enough to calm his fears. I fell asleep with my hands still protecting my belly, already planning the fight of my life. The morning light filtering through Helen's lace curtains felt different somehow. Softer and more forgiving than the harsh fluorescence of our apartment. I woke to the gentle sound of Helen humming in the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the oven. For a blissful moment, I forgot where I was and why, until Lucas gave a particularly strong kick that reminded me of everything that had happened the night before. I dressed slowly in the clothes Helen had washed and dried for me, running my hands over my belly as I tried to process the magnitude of what I was facing. Today, I would have to start building a defense against people who wanted to take my child, including my own husband. The thought made my stomach churn with anxiety and something else that felt suspiciously like determination. Helen appeared in the doorway with a steaming mug of decaffeinated coffee, her silver hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. How did you sleep, dear? Better than I expected, I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Helen, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. She waved away my gratitude with a flour-dusted hand. Nonsense. Now, I've made some calls this morning while you were sleeping. My friend Margaret's daughter is a family lawyer in Portland, and she's agreed to see you today. Pro bono, given the circumstances. I stared at her, overwhelmed by this woman's kindness and efficiency. You called a lawyer? This morning? Sometimes the best defense is a swift offense, Helen said matter-of-factly. Carolyn will see you at 11. I'll drive you myself. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, immediately buzzed with a series of messages. 3 from Derek, 2 from Vanessa, and 1 from Carol. I scrolled through them with growing unease. Derek's messages progressed from concerned to frustrated. Where are you? Come home so we can talk. Nat, this is ridiculous. You're being emotional. Fine, stay wherever you are, but we need to discuss the practical aspects of this situation. Vanessa's messages were more calculating. I hope you've had time to think things through. Marcus and I are here when you're ready to move forward. The midwife I mentioned can meet with us tomorrow to discuss the birth plan. Carol's single message was the most chilling. Derek told me about your reaction last night. I think it's best if we involve some professionals to help guide this decision. They're not backing down, I told Helen, showing her the messages. Helen's expression hardened as she read them. Of course they're not. They think they can wear you down, make you believe you're being unreasonable. That's exactly why we need Caroline. The drive to Portland felt longer than usual, giving me too much time to think about what I was going to say to a lawyer. How do you explain that your family wants to steal your baby without sounding paranoid or unstable? I kept rehearsing different versions of the story in my head, none of them sounding as believable as I needed them to. Caroline Martinez's office was located in a modest building downtown, far from the glass towers where the expensive lawyers worked. The waiting room was comfortable but not luxurious, with mismatched furniture and children's drawings taped to the walls. It felt like a place where real people came with real problems. Caroline herself was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She greeted Helen with genuine warmth before turning her attention to me. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I understand you're facing a very unusual situation." We settled in her office, which was organized chaos with case files stacked on every surface and family photos mixed in with legal diplomas on the walls. Caroline poured water for all of us and pulled out a legal pad. "Tell me everything," she said simply. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." I told her about Vanessa's fertility struggles, her increasing involvement in my pregnancy, and the dinner conversation where their plan was revealed. Caroline took notes steadily, occasionally asking for clarification or more details. When I got to Derek's betrayal and Vanessa's legal threats, Caroline's pen stopped moving. "She specifically mentioned legal ways to make this happen?" Caroline asked. "Yes. She said if Derek supported the plan and they could demonstrate they could provide a better environment, there were ways to make it work." Caroline set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Natalie, what they're discussing isn't legal adoption. It sounds more like fraud, potentially conspiracy. If they actually went through with registering a child born to you as born to Vanessa, that would be falsifying birth records, which is a serious crime." The relief I felt at hearing a legal professional validate my fears was overwhelming. "So they can't actually do this?" "Not legally, no. But that doesn't mean they won't try other approaches. They could attempt to prove you're an unfit mother, or they might try to manipulate you into signing away your parental rights under duress." Caroline leaned forward, her expression serious. "The fact that your husband is supporting this plan complicates things significantly. In a custody dispute, his wishes would carry considerable weight. What can I do?" "Several things. First, we document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt to pressure you. Second, we make sure you have support systems in place that can testify to your fitness as a mother. Third, we prepare for the possibility that they might try to have you declared mentally incompetent to make decisions about your child." The last point hit me like ice water. "They would do that?" "It's a common tactic when family members want to gain control of a situation. They claim the person is having a breakdown, is unable to think clearly, needs intervention for their own good." Caroline's voice was gentle but firm. "That's why your mental state and support system are crucial right now." Helen spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. "What about protective orders? Can we prevent them from harassing her?" "Possibly, but we'd need clear evidence of harassment or threats. The messages you showed me are suggestive, but not explicit enough to convince a judge." Caroline turned back to me. "However, there are other steps we can take. We can send them a formal cease and desist letter, making it clear that any attempt to coerce you regarding your child will result in legal action. We can also contact your doctor to ensure your medical records are protected and that only you can make decisions about your care." "Dr. Henley?" I said suddenly. "They mentioned finding their own midwife, someone discreet. What if they try to interfere with my medical care?" Caroline made another note. "We'll contact Dr. Henley today and make sure she understands the situation." Most medical professionals take patient autonomy very seriously, especially in obstetric cases. We spent the next hour going over practical details. Caroline explained the legal process for establishing paternity and maternity, the requirements for birth certificates, and the various ways someone might try to circumvent the system. She also outlined what would happen if Derek decided to pursue custody through the courts. "The good news is that biological mothers have strong legal protections," Caroline said. "Unless there's clear evidence of abuse or neglect, courts are reluctant to remove children from their mothers, especially newborns. The bad news is that custody battles can be expensive and emotionally devastating." "I don't have money for a long legal fight," I admitted. "We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. For now, my services are covered, and there are organizations that help women in situations like yours." As we prepared to leave, Caroline handed me her business card and a folder full of information about parental rights and resources for new mothers. "Natalie, I want you to remember something important. You are this baby's mother. No one can change that fact, no matter how much money they have or how convincing their arguments sound. Your job right now is to protect yourself and your child, and you're doing exactly that. The drive back to Riverside was quieter than the trip to Portland. I felt better having legal representation, but also more aware of how serious the situation had become. This wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a legal battle that could determine my child's future. Caroline seems capable, Helen observed as we pulled into her driveway. She does. I just wish I didn't need her services. Sometimes we don't get to choose our battles, dear, but we can choose how we fight them. My phone had been buzzing throughout the drive back, but I'd ignored it. Now, safely in Helen's living room, I checked the messages with a growing sense of dread. Derek had called 4 times and left 2 voicemails. The first was pleading. "Nat, please come home. We can work this out without involving lawyers or making this complicated." The second was more ominous. "I know you went to see a lawyer today. That's not going to help anything. You're making this harder than it needs to be." How did he know I'd seen a lawyer? I felt a chill of realization. He was probably tracking my location through our shared phone plan. Or maybe Vanessa had connections in the legal community. Either way, they were monitoring my movements, which made me feel even more trapped. There were also 3 new messages from Vanessa, each more aggressive than the last. "I hope you're not doing anything rash, Natalie. Remember, we all want what's best for the baby. Getting lawyers involved will only make this messy for everyone, especially Lucas. You're being selfish. Think about what's best for him, not what's best for you." The final message made my blood boil. How dare she accuse me of being selfish for wanting to keep my own child? Helen read the messages over my shoulder, her expression darkening with each one. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said. "Classic manipulation tactics." "It's working," I admitted. "I feel like I'm going crazy. Part of me keeps wondering if they're right, if I am being selfish." "Natalie, look at me." Helen's voice was firm. "Wanting to raise your own child is not selfish. It's natural, it's normal, and it's your right. Don't let them twist your thoughts." That evening, I tried to establish some sense of normalcy. I called my supervisor at the marketing firm to explain that I was taking some personal time and might need to adjust my maternity leave plans. I contacted Dr. Henley's office to schedule my next appointment and made sure they understood that only I was authorized to make decisions about my care. I even managed to eat a proper dinner, Helen's homemade lasagna that tasted like comfort and security. But the illusion of normalcy shattered when Derek appeared at Helen's front door. I was washing dishes when I heard the doorbell, followed by Helen's sharp voice saying, "I don't think that's a good idea right now." I dried my hands and walked to the living room, where I could see Derek through the window, his face a mixture of frustration and desperation. "I just want to talk to my wife," Derek was saying. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Helen glanced at me, clearly ready to send him away if I wanted her to. But I knew this conversation was inevitable. Hiding from Derek wouldn't make the problem disappear. "It's okay," I told Helen. "I'll talk to him." I stepped out onto the porch, pulling Helen's cardigan tighter around my shoulders. Derek looked terrible, like he hadn't slept at all. His work clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Thank God," he said when he saw me. "Nat, I've been worried sick. Why won't you come home?" "You know why," I said quietly. "Look, maybe Vanessa got a little carried away last night. But you have to understand where she's coming from. She's desperate to be a mother, and she sees how we're struggling." "How we're struggling?" I repeated. "Derek, we're having a baby. Our baby. It's not Vanessa's place to rescue us from our own lives." "But what if she's right? What if we can't give Lucas everything he needs?" I stared at my husband, this man I'd loved and trusted and planned a future with, and I barely recognized him. "When did you stop believing in us?" Derek ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. "It's not about not believing in us, it's about being realistic. My job isn't stable, your maternity leave is only partially paid, and we're already behind on rent. How are we going to afford daycare? Or college? Or all the things kids need?" "The same way millions of other parents do," I said. "We figure it out. We work hard, we make sacrifices, we love our child enough to do whatever it takes." But what if whatever it takes isn't enough? The question hung between us in the cool evening air. I realized then that Derek's betrayal wasn't born of malice, but of fear. He was terrified of failing as a father, so terrified that he was willing to give away his child rather than risk disappointing him. "Derek," I said gently, "being a good parent isn't about having money or a big house or perfect circumstances. It's about love and commitment and showing up every day, even when it's hard." "Vanessa could show up every day too," he said stubbornly. "And she could do it without worrying about groceries or rent, or whether we can afford soccer lessons. Vanessa isn't his mother. I am. But maybe that's not the most important thing." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My husband, the father of my child, didn't think being Lucas's mother was the most important thing. I felt something break inside me, some final thread of hope that we could work this out as a family. "If that's what you really believe," I said slowly, "then we don't have anything else to talk about." Derek's face crumpled. "Nat, please. Don't give up on us. You gave up on us the moment you decided our child would be better off with someone else." I turned to go back inside, but Derek grabbed my arm. "Wait. Just wait. What if we could find a compromise?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. "Let go of me, Derek." He released my arm immediately, but continued talking. "What if Vanessa and Marcus helped us financially? They could be like godparents. Really involved godparents. We could all raise Lucas together. That's not a compromise. That's still giving them control over our child." "Not control. Partnership. I don't want a partnership with people who tried to steal my baby." Derek's expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable. And dramatic. Nobody tried to steal anything." "Really? Then what would you call registering my child as Vanessa's?" "I call it thinking outside the box to solve a problem." I stared at him, amazed at his ability to rationalize something so fundamentally wrong. "The only problem here is that you don't want to be a father." "That's not true, isn't it? Because a man who wanted to be a father would be fighting for his child, not trying to give him away." Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. "Fine. If that's how you want to play this, we can do it the hard way. But you should know that Vanessa and Marcus are prepared to file for custody if necessary." "On what grounds?" "Mental instability. Inability to provide a stable home environment. They have resources, Nat. Good lawyers, documented evidence of our financial struggles, testimony from family members about your erratic behavior. The threat was no longer subtle. They were prepared to destroy me to get my child." I felt Lucas move inside me, a gentle reminder of what I was fighting for. "Get off this property," I said quietly. "And don't come back unless you're ready to be the husband and father we both deserve." Derek stood there for another moment, looking like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he walked to his truck and drove away, leaving me alone on Helen's porch with the weight of an impending war settling on my shoulders. Helen was waiting for me in the living room, her face full of quiet sympathy. "I heard," she said simply. "They're going to try to take him," I said, sinking into her comfortable armchair. "They're going to claim I'm mentally unstable and unfit to be a mother." "Then we make sure they can't prove that," Helen said firmly. "Starting tomorrow, we build a case that shows exactly what kind of mother you are and what kind of people they are." That night, I lay in Helen's guest bed with my hands on my belly, feeling Lucas moving restlessly inside me. I whispered to him the way I had every night, but this time my words carried a new weight. "I promise you, baby boy, I will never let them take you from me. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do, you're staying with your mama." As if he understood, Lucas settled into stillness, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the silence. No buzzing phone, no urgent knocking at the door, just the peaceful quiet of Helen's cottage, and the distant sound of birds outside the window. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe Derek and Vanessa had finally accepted my decision and would leave us alone. That illusion lasted exactly until I checked my phone and saw 17 missed calls from unknown numbers. Helen was already up, moving quietly around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had been an early riser for decades. The smell of fresh bread filled the air, and I found her pulling a golden loaf from the oven when I shuffled into the kitchen. "Those calls started around 6 this morning," she said without preamble, nodding toward my phone. "I turned the ringer off so you could sleep." I scrolled through the call log with growing unease. Different numbers, but all local area codes. All calling within minutes of each other. This wasn't random. "It's a harassment campaign," I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. "They're having people call me to wear me down." Helen set the bread on a cooling rack and turned to face me, her expression grim. "Or to make you look paranoid when you report it to the authorities." The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Helen and I exchanged glances, both of us immediately on edge. Through the front window, I could see a woman in a business suit standing on the porch carrying a clipboard and what looked like official documents. "Child Protective Services," the woman announced when Helen opened the door. "I'm here to conduct a welfare check on Natalie Brooks and her unborn child." My blood turned to ice. They had actually done it. They had called CPS and reported me as an unfit mother. I felt Lucas kick frantically inside me, as if he could sense the danger we were suddenly facing. Helen stepped aside to let the woman enter, her face carefully neutral. "I'm Helen Morrison. Mrs. Brooks is staying with me temporarily." The CPS worker, who introduced herself as Jennifer Walsh, was younger than I expected, probably in her late 20s, with tired eyes and the kind of professional demeanor that suggested she'd seen too much in too few years. She looked around Helen's tidy living room before focusing on me. "Mrs. Brooks, I've received reports of concerning behavior related to your pregnancy and upcoming birth," she said, consulting her clipboard. "I need to ask you some questions and assess your current living situation." "What kind of reports?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Reports that you've abandoned your marital home, that you're exhibiting signs of mental instability, and that you're making irrational decisions that could endanger your unborn child." Jennifer's voice was neutral, but I could see her taking in details of my appearance, my surroundings, my demeanor. I forced myself to remain calm, remembering Caroline's advice about documentation and maintaining my composure. "Who made these reports?" "I can't reveal that information, but I can tell you that multiple family members have expressed concern about your well-being." Multiple family members. So it wasn't just Vanessa and Derek. They had gotten Carol involved, probably Marcus too. Maybe even other relatives I hadn't considered. They were painting a picture of a woman having a breakdown, surrounded by concerned family members who only wanted to help. "I'm not exhibiting any signs of mental instability," I said carefully. "I left my husband because he and his family were pressuring me to give up my baby to his sister. I'm staying with a friend while I figure out my next steps." Jennifer made notes on her clipboard. "Can you tell me more about this pressure? What form did it take?" I explained the dinner conversation, Vanessa's plan to register Lucas as her own child, Derek's support of the scheme. As I talked, Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, becoming more engaged and less routine. "They wanted you to give birth at your sister-in-law's house and falsify birth records?" she asked. "Yes. They said it would be better for everyone, that they could provide more for him than I could." Jennifer made more extensive notes. This wasn't the story she had expected to hear, I realized. The reports had probably painted me as delusional, making up stories about family members trying to steal my baby. But my account was too detailed, too consistent to dismiss as the ramblings of an unstable woman. "Mrs. Brooks, have you been receiving prenatal care?" "Yes, with Dr. Patricia Henley at Riverside General. I have my next appointment scheduled for Friday." "And how are you supporting yourself financially?" "I work as a graphic designer for a marketing firm in Portland. I'm currently on personal leave, but I'll be eligible for maternity benefits." Jennifer spent the next hour going through a standard assessment checklist. Did I have adequate housing? Yes, Helen had graciously offered her guest room. Did I have support systems in place? Yes, Helen and my lawyer Caroline, plus Dr. Henley. Did I have any history of substance abuse or mental health issues? No documented history, though I acknowledged the stress of the current situation. "Mrs. Morrison," Jennifer said, turning to Helen, "can you describe Mrs. Brooks, behavior since she's been staying with you. Helen straightened in her chair, every inch the retired school teacher she had once been. Natalie has been nothing but responsible and courteous. She's clearly under stress, but she's handling it with remarkable grace. She takes care of herself, eats properly, rests when she needs to. She's devoted to that baby's well-being. Have you observed any concerning behavior? Mood swings, irrational decisions, anything that might indicate she's not capable of caring for a child? Absolutely not, Helen said firmly. If anything, I've been impressed by how level-headed she's remained despite what she's dealing with. Any mother would be upset by family members trying to take her child. Jennifer closed her folder and looked directly at me. Mrs. Brooks, I have to ask this directly. Are you having thoughts of harming yourself or your baby? Never, I said without hesitation. Everything I'm doing is to protect him. And you understand that giving birth in an unlicensed setting with an unqualified attendant could endanger both you and your child? Yes, which is why I refuse to go along with their plan. I'm giving birth at Riverside General with my doctor. Jennifer packed up her materials and stood to leave. I'll be filing a report that indicates no immediate concerns about child welfare. However, I may need to follow up after the baby is born, particularly if there are ongoing family disputes about custody. After Jennifer left, Helen and I sat in the living room processing what had just happened. The CPS visit had been nerve-wracking, but it had also revealed something important. The official system wasn't automatically going to side with Vanessa and Derek just because they had money and influence. She believed you, Helen observed. I could see it in her face when you explained what they wanted you to do. But they'll try again, I said. This was just the opening move. As if to prove my point, my phone rang. Caroline's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. Natalie, I just got word that CPS visited you this morning, Caroline said without preamble. How did it go? Better than expected. The caseworkers seemed to take my side of the story seriously. Good, but we need to be prepared for escalation. I've been doing some research on your sister-in-law, and there are some things you should know. My stomach clenched. What kind of things? Can you come to my office this afternoon? I'd rather discuss this in person. The drive back to Portland felt ominous, Helen's usual cheerful chatter replaced by tense silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something bigger than a simple family dispute. Caroline's office felt different this time, more like a war room than a place for friendly consultation. She had files spread across her desk, legal documents, and what looked like investigative reports mixed in with official paperwork. Sit down, Caroline said, her expression serious. I've been digging into the backgrounds of everyone involved in this situation, and I've found some concerning patterns. She opened the first file. Your sister-in-law Vanessa has been involved in 2 previous adoption attempts that fell through under questionable circumstances. In both cases, she attempted to establish relationships with pregnant women and then tried to convince them to choose her as an adoptive parent. I felt sick. She's done this before? It gets worse. In the most recent case, she was accused of trying to coerce the birth mother into signing papers while she was still under the influence of pain medication after delivery. The case was dropped when the birth mother moved out of state, but there's a pattern of predatory behavior. Caroline opened another file. I also found something interesting about the midwife she mentioned. There's no licensed midwife in this area who matches the description of someone willing to falsify birth records. However, there have been reports of unlicensed birth attendants who work with people trying to circumvent the legal system. So she was planning to have me give birth with someone who isn't even qualified? It's worse than that, Natalie. I think she was planning to have you give birth with someone who would help her steal your baby and make it look legal. The room seemed to spin around me. I had known Vanessa's plan was wrong, but I hadn't realized how calculated and dangerous it actually was. This wasn't just about a desperate woman wanting a child. This was about someone who had made a career out of manipulating vulnerable pregnant women. There's more, Caroline continued. I've been looking into Derek's finances, and he's in deeper financial trouble than you probably realize. His construction company has been behind on payments to subcontractors, and he's facing potential lawsuits. There's a real possibility that he's supporting Vanessa's plan because she and Marcus have offered to pay off his debts. The betrayal was complete. My husband hadn't just been convinced that giving up our child was best for Lucas. He had been bought. What do we do with this information? I asked. We use it to build a case that shows exactly what kind of people you're dealing with. We document the pattern of predatory behavior, the financial incentives, the willingness to break the law to get what they want. And we make sure that any judge who hears this case understands that this isn't about what's best for your child. It's about what these people want, regardless of who gets hurt. Caroline pulled out another document. I've also prepared a restraining order request. Given the harassment calls this morning and the false CPS report, we have grounds to ask the court to prohibit them from contacting you or interfering with your pregnancy. Will it work? It should, especially with the evidence we've gathered. But Natalie, you need to understand that this is going to get ugly before it gets better. People like Vanessa don't give up easily, and they don't fight fair. As if summoned by her words, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your email," was all it said. I opened my email app with trembling fingers. The message was from Derek, but sent from an account I didn't recognize. The subject line made my blood run cold. Final offer. Natalie, the email began. I've tried to be reasonable about this situation, but you're forcing my hand. Vanessa and Marcus have made a generous offer that would benefit everyone involved. They're willing to pay off all our debts, set up a college fund for Lucas, and provide you with enough money to start fresh, somewhere new. All you have to do is sign a few papers relinquishing your parental rights. The email continued. If you don't accept this offer, things are going to get very difficult for you. We have evidence of your erratic behavior, testimony from family members about your instability, and documentation of your inability to provide a stable home for a child. We also have lawyers who are very good at what they do. The choice is yours, but I want you to think about what's really best for Lucas. Do you want him to grow up in poverty with a mother who chose pride over his well-being? Or do you want him to have every advantage in life with parents who can provide for him? You have 48 hours to decide. Caroline read the email over my shoulder, her face hardening with each word. This is extortion, she said flatly. They're threatening you financially and legally to coerce you into giving up your child. Can they actually do what they're threatening? Some of it, yes. They clearly have money for good lawyers. And family court battles can be expensive and unpredictable. But Natalie, this email is also evidence. They've just put their entire scheme in writing, including the financial incentives and the threats. Caroline forwarded the email to herself and began typing a response. I'm going to reply to this on your behalf, making it clear that any further contact should go through me, and that we consider this harassment. As Caroline worked, I stared out her office window at the Portland skyline, thinking about the 48-hour deadline Derek had given me. 2 days to decide whether to fight for my child or surrender him to people who saw him as a commodity to be bought and sold. Caroline, I said quietly, what if they're right? What if I can't provide for him the way they can? Caroline stopped typing and looked at me directly. Natalie, being a good parent isn't about money. It's about love, commitment, and putting your child's real needs first. Everything these people have done shows that they're focused on their own wants, not Lucas's needs. But what if the court doesn't see it that way? Then we make sure they do. We show them who these people really are and what they're really after. We prove that a loving mother, in modest circumstances, is infinitely better than manipulative people with money. Caroline finished her response and showed it to me before sending it. The email was professional but firm. My client will not be responding to threats or extortion attempts. All future communication should be directed to this office. Any further harassment will result in additional legal action. As we prepared to leave Caroline's office, she handed me a thick folder. This is everything we've gathered so far. Keep it somewhere safe, preferably with Helen. If anything happens to you, she'll know to give it to me immediately. The drive back to Riverside felt like traveling through enemy territory. Every car that followed us for more than a few blocks made me nervous. Every phone call to Helen's house felt like a potential threat. I was beginning to understand what it felt like to be hunted. That evening, Helen and I sat at her kitchen table going through the folder Caroline had given me. The evidence was damning. Vanessa's history of targeting pregnant women, Derek's financial problems, the pattern of manipulation and coercion. It should have been enough to end this nightmare, but I knew it was just the beginning. "They're not going to give up," I said, closing the folder. "No," Helen agreed. "But now we know exactly who we're fighting." My phone rang and Dr. Henley's name appeared on the screen. I answered quickly, grateful for contact with someone who wasn't part of this mess. "Natalie," Dr. Henley's voice was concerned. "I had a strange visit today from your sister-in-law and her husband. They claimed to be checking on your well-being and asked about your mental state and due date." My heart sank. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, of course. Patient confidentiality is absolute. But I wanted you to know they were here, and I wanted to remind you that only you can authorize anyone to receive information about your care. Thank you for calling. And Dr. Henley? If anyone else comes asking about me or tries to interfere with my appointments, please let me know immediately." "Of course. Natalie, is everything all right? You sound stressed." I looked at Helen, who nodded encouragingly. "Dr. Henley, I need to tell you about a situation that's developed. My husband's family is trying to coerce me into giving up my baby, and they may try to interfere with my medical care." I explained the basic situation to Dr. Henley, who listened with growing alarm. "Natalie, this is very serious. I'm going to flag your file to ensure that only you can make decisions about your care. And I think we should consider moving up your next appointment." "Why?" "Because if these people are as determined as you describe, they may try to interfere with your delivery. We need to make sure you have a solid birth plan that they can't disrupt." After hanging up with Dr. Henley, I sat in Helen's kitchen feeling the weight of the battle ahead. Vanessa and Derek had shown their hand now. They weren't just trying to convince me to give up Lucas voluntarily. They were preparing to take him by force, using money, lawyers, and manipulation to break down every defense I could mount. But they had also made a crucial mistake. In their arrogance and desperation, they had left a paper trail that clearly showed their true motives and methods. They had threatened me in writing, harassed me through multiple channels, and revealed their willingness to break the law to get what they wanted. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt Lucas moving restlessly inside me. I placed both hands on my belly and whispered to him the way I did every night. "Don't worry, baby boy. Mama's got a plan now. And we're gonna win this." For the first time since this nightmare began, I actually believed my own words. The 48 hours felt like 48 days. Every minute stretched endlessly as I waited for Derek and Vanessa's next move, knowing they wouldn't simply accept my silence as an answer. Helen had taken to answering all calls to her landline, screening each one with the efficiency of a seasoned receptionist, while I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy despite the constant knot of anxiety in my chest. On the morning of the third day, Caroline called with urgency in her voice. "Natalie, they filed a motion for emergency custody. They're claiming you're a flight risk and that the baby is in imminent danger due to your alleged mental breakdown." I felt the floor drop out from under me. "When is the hearing?" "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. They pushed it through as an emergency motion, claiming time-sensitive circumstances." Caroline's voice was steady, but I could hear the concern underneath. The good news is that emergency hearings have a very high burden of proof. The bad news is that we have about 4 hours to prepare our defense. Helen drove me to Portland, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled determination. Neither of us spoke much during the drive, both lost in our own thoughts about what the afternoon might bring. I kept one hand on my belly, feeling Lucas moving restlessly inside me, as if he could sense the tension surrounding his impending birth. Caroline met us at the courthouse steps, looking every inch the warrior in her charcoal gray suit and carrying a briefcase that seemed to weigh as much as I did. She had papers sticking out from every pocket, sticky notes marking important passages, and the focused intensity of someone who had spent the morning building a case from scratch. "I've been busy," she said by way of greeting. "I have statements from Dr. Henley about your mental state and prenatal care, documentation of their harassment campaign, and affidavits from 3 women who were targeted by Vanessa in previous adoption schemes." "3 women?" I asked, my heart racing. "I put out some calls yesterday after our meeting. Word travels fast in certain communities, and it turns out Vanessa has quite a reputation among women who've been through difficult pregnancies. 2 were willing to testify by affidavit, and 1 is flying in from Seattle to appear in person. Inside the courthouse, the hallways buzzed with the usual chaos of legal proceedings. Lawyers huddled with clients in corners, families waited anxiously on benches, and the general atmosphere of barely controlled crisis filled the air. I spotted Derek and Vanessa before they saw me, sitting on a bench near the courtroom with a man in an expensive suit who was clearly their attorney. Vanessa looked radiant, dressed in a soft blue dress that highlighted her auburn hair, her makeup flawless despite the stress of the situation. She had her hands folded over her stomach in a gesture that seemed calculated to suggest maternal longing. Derek sat beside her, looking uncomfortable but determined, occasionally nodding as their lawyer spoke in low, urgent tones. The sight of them together, united in their plan to take my child, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. They looked like the perfect prospective parents, successful and stable, while I sat there in Helen's borrowed dress, 8 months pregnant and fighting for my life. "Don't let them get in your head," Caroline murmured, following my gaze. "Remember, we have truth on our side." The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that gave everything a harsh, institutional feel. Judge Rebecca Martinez took the bench promptly at 2 o'clock, her expression neutral as she reviewed the stack of papers in front of her. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the petition for emergency custody of the unborn child of Derek and Natalie Brooks," Judge Martinez announced. "Counselor Williams, you may proceed with your arguments for the petitioners." Vanessa and Derek's lawyer stood up, his confidence filling the room like expensive cologne. "Your Honor, we are here today because of a tragic situation involving a young woman whose mental health has deteriorated to the point where she poses a danger to herself and her unborn child." He painted a picture of me that I barely recognized, a woman who had abandoned her home and family, who was living with strangers, who had made wild accusations against loving family members who only wanted to help. He described Vanessa and Marcus as concerned relatives who had offered support and assistance, only to be met with paranoia and hostility. "The respondent has refused reasonable offers of help," Williams continued, "including an offer to live in a safe, comfortable environment during the final weeks of her pregnancy. Instead, she has chosen to live with a woman she barely knows, has consulted with lawyers about restraining orders against her own family, and has made increasingly erratic decisions that suggest a complete break from reality." I watched the judge's face as Williams spoke, trying to read her expression. She was taking notes, occasionally glancing in my direction, but her face remained professionally neutral. Williams called Derek as his first witness. My husband took the stand looking haggard but sincere, the picture of a concerned father-to-be. Under direct examination, he described our financial struggles, my increasing paranoia about his family's motives, and his growing concern for my mental state. "She started saying that Vanessa was trying to steal the baby," Derek testified, his voice breaking slightly. "She accused my family of conspiracy, of trying to falsify birth records. These are people who love her, who have only tried to help." "And what was your sister-in-law's actual offer?" Williams asked. "Vanessa offered to let Natalie stay at her house during the final weeks of pregnancy, where she could be more comfortable and have help with the baby after birth. She offered to pay for private medical care, to help us get back on our feet financially. All she wanted was to be involved in the baby's life as a loving aunt." The lies flowed so smoothly that I almost believed them myself. Derek made it sound like Vanessa's plan was simple generosity, twisted by my paranoid mind into something sinister. Caroline's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Brooks, did you discuss with your wife the possibility of your sister-in-law registering the baby as her own child?" Derek's composure faltered slightly. "That was never seriously considered. But it was discussed. Vanessa mentioned it as a theoretical possibility, but only because she thought it might help with insurance and medical benefits." "Insurance and medical benefits that would list your sister-in-law as the mother and you as the father? It was just an idea. We never intended to go through with it." Caroline pulled out a printed email. "Mr. Brooks, do you recognize this email sent from your account 3 days ago?" Derek's face went pale as Caroline read portions of his ultimatum email aloud, including the threat of legal action and the offer to pay off debts in exchange for my parental rights. That email mentions relinquishing parental rights in exchange for money, Caroline said. Does that sound like theoretical discussion about insurance benefits? I was upset, Derek stammered. I said things I didn't mean. You offered your wife money to give up her child, and when she refused, you filed for emergency custody. Is that the action of a concerned father or someone who wants to take a child from its mother? Williams objected, but the damage was done. Derek's credibility was shattered, and his true motives were exposed for the court to see. Vanessa took the stand next, her performance even more polished than Derek's. She spoke tearfully about her fertility struggles, her deep desire to be a mother, and her genuine concern for my well-being. She described our relationship as close, painting herself as the caring sister-in-law who had watched me struggle with the realities of impending motherhood. I just wanted to help, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When I saw how overwhelmed Natalie was becoming, how the financial stress was affecting her, I thought maybe I could provide some stability. And what did you hope to gain from helping Mrs. Brooks? Williams asked. Nothing, Vanessa said, her voice full of wounded innocence. I love that baby already. I've been preparing for his arrival alongside Natalie. Buying clothes. Setting up a nursery. I just wanted to be part of his life. Caroline's cross-examination revealed a different side of Vanessa entirely. Ms. Brooks, have you previously attempted to adopt children from other pregnant women? I've explored adoption options, yes. In fact, you've approached at least 3 pregnant women over the past 2 years with offers of financial support in exchange for their children, haven't you? Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. Those were legitimate adoption discussions. Discussions that included offers to pay for housing, medical care, and living expenses. That's normal in adoption situations. What's also normal in adoption situations, Ms. Brooks, is working through licensed agencies with proper legal oversight. Did you work through agencies in these previous cases? Not always. Caroline produced the affidavits from the other women Vanessa had targeted. As she read excerpts aloud, a pattern emerged of predatory behavior, of a woman who specifically sought out vulnerable pregnant women and attempted to manipulate them into giving up their children. Ms. Brooks, in the case of Jennifer Walsh in 2019, you offered her $10,000 to sign adoption papers while she was still under the influence of pain medication after delivery. Is that correct? That's a mischaracterization of what happened. And in the case of Maria Santos in 2020, you attempted to convince her to give birth at your home with an unlicensed midwife, promising that it would be easier for everyone if the birth wasn't officially documented at a hospital. Is that accurate? Vanessa's face flushed red. These women are lying. They're just bitter because their adoption plans didn't work out. 3 different women, in 3 different situations, all describing the same pattern of behavior from you. All describing offers of money and housing in exchange for their children. All describing pressure to avoid official medical care and legal oversight. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, are you currently licensed to facilitate adoptions in this state? Quote, No, Your Honor, but I was just trying to help these women. By circumventing the legal protections designed to ensure proper adoption procedures? Vanessa's lawyer objected, but the judge had heard enough. The pattern was clear, and Vanessa's credibility was destroyed. Caroline called our witnesses next. Dr. Henley testified about my mental state, confirming that I showed no signs of psychological distress beyond the normal stress of dealing with family conflict. She described my prenatal care as exemplary, and my concern for the baby's well-being as appropriate and healthy. In your professional opinion, Caroline asked, is Mrs. Brooks capable of making decisions about her pregnancy and her child? Absolutely, Dr. Henley replied firmly. She is a competent, caring, expectant mother who has consistently made appropriate choices for her health and her baby's health. Helen took the stand and described my behavior since staying with her. She's been nothing but responsible, Helen testified. She eats properly, sleeps when she needs to, attends her medical appointments. She talks to the baby, reads to him, plays music for him. She's devoted to that child's well-being. The woman from Seattle, Jennifer Walsh, provided the most damaging testimony against Vanessa. She described in detail how Vanessa had approached her during her pregnancy, offering financial support and housing, slowly building a relationship before revealing her true intentions. She wanted me to give birth at her house, Jennifer testified. She said she had a midwife who could deliver the baby quietly, without all the hospital paperwork. She said it would be easier if the baby was just registered as hers from the beginning. "What happened when you refused?" Caroline asked. "She became threatening. She said I was being selfish, that I couldn't provide for a child the way she could. She said she would take the baby through legal means if I didn't cooperate willingly. The parallels to my own situation were unmistakable." Judge Martinez took extensive notes during Jennifer's testimony, occasionally glancing at Vanessa with an expression of growing disapproval. Carolyn's closing argument was powerful and direct. "Your Honor, this is not a case about what's best for a child. This is a case about a woman with a documented pattern of predatory behavior who has targeted my client for the same treatment she has given to other vulnerable pregnant women." She outlined the evidence systematically: Vanessa's history of targeting pregnant women, the financial incentives offered to Derek, the attempts to bypass legal protections, the harassment campaign designed to make me appear unstable. The petitioners want this court to remove a child from a competent, loving mother and give that child to people who have demonstrated a willingness to break the law, manipulate the vulnerable, and treat children as commodities to be bought and sold. Williams' closing argument attempted to refocus on my supposed instability and the benefits Vanessa and Marcus could provide. But the evidence had already spoken, and his words fell flat against the mountain of documentation Caroline had presented. Judge Martinez deliberated for less than 10 minutes. When she returned, her expression was stern. "I have reviewed the evidence presented in this emergency hearing, and I find no credible evidence that Mrs. Natalie Brooks poses any danger to herself or her unborn child. In fact, the evidence suggests that she has acted responsibly and appropriately in removing herself from a situation where she was being pressured to relinquish her parental rights." She turned to look directly at Vanessa and Derek. "I am deeply troubled by the pattern of behavior revealed in this hearing. The attempts to manipulate a pregnant woman, to bypass legal protections, and to use financial pressure to coerce someone into giving up their child are not only unethical but potentially criminal." The judge's voice grew stronger as she continued. "This court exists to protect the best interests of children, not to facilitate schemes by adults who believe they can buy and sell babies based on their economic circumstances. The emergency petition for custody is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting the petitioners from contacting Mrs. Brooks or interfering with her pregnancy or medical care in any way." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Vanessa burst into tears, but they weren't the sympathetic tears she had shed on the witness stand. These were tears of rage and frustration, the tantrum of someone accustomed to getting her way, who had finally been told no. Derek sat stunned, staring at the judge as if he couldn't process what had just happened. The expensive lawyer gathered his papers with the efficient movements of someone already planning his bill. Caroline squeezed my hand under the table. "It's over," she whispered. "You won." But as we gathered our things to leave, I caught the look Vanessa gave me across the courtroom. It was pure hatred, the expression of someone who had lost a battle but hadn't given up the war. Her whispered words to Derek as they left were inaudible, but her body language spoke volumes. This might have been the end of the legal battle, but I had a feeling it wasn't the end of my problems with Vanessa Brooks. The restraining order should have brought peace, but victory in court didn't automatically translate to victory in life. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in weeks, but I also knew that legal documents were just pieces of paper. The real test would be whether Vanessa and Derek would actually respect the judge's ruling or find new ways to make my life miserable. Helen drove us back to Riverside in comfortable silence, both of us processing what had just happened. The autumn sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the road, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Lucas and I could live in peace. That illusion lasted exactly 12 hours. I woke up to the sound of Helen's voice, sharp and angry, coming from the front porch. Through the bedroom window, I could see her standing in her robe and slippers, hands on her hips, facing someone I couldn't see from my angle. I don't care what your sob story is, Helen was saying, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had taught high school for 30 years. There's a restraining order, and you're violating it by being here. I pulled on Helen's borrowed robe and made my way to the living room, where I could see through the front window. Carol Brooks stood on the porch steps, looking smaller and more frail than I remembered, but with the same determined set to her jaw that Derek had inherited. I just want to talk to her, Carol was saying. I'm not Vanessa or Derek. The restraining order doesn't apply to me. Helen turned when she heard me approach. She's been here for 10 minutes, claiming she needs to speak with you about family business. Through the window, Carol spotted me, and her expression shifted to something that might have been regret or manipulation. It was hard to tell. Natalie, please, just 5 minutes. I'm Derek's mother. I have a right to see my grandchild. Caroline had warned me about this possibility. Family members not named in the restraining order might try to contact me, claiming they weren't part of the conspiracy. It was a common tactic to find new ways to apply pressure. You don't have any rights regarding my child, I called through the window. And you were part of that dinner where this whole scheme was planned? Carol's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked genuinely upset. I know how it must have seemed, but I was just trying to keep the family together. Vanessa can be very persuasive when she sets her mind on something. Persuasive enough to convince you that stealing babies was a good idea? Nobody was trying to steal anything, Carol protested. We just thought maybe there could be a compromise, a way for everyone to be happy. I opened the front door, but didn't step outside. There is no compromise when it comes to my child, Carol. He's not a timeshare or a business deal. Carol looked older than her years, standing there in the morning light with her carefully styled hair and church clothes. Natalie, Derek is my son. That baby you're carrying is my grandchild. I've been looking forward to being a grandmother for years. Then you should have supported your son in being a father instead of supporting a plan to give away his child. He's scared, Carol said quietly. Derek is terrified of being a bad father, of not being able to provide. When Vanessa offered to help, it seemed like an answer to his prayers. For the first time in this entire ordeal, someone had acknowledged the fear that I knew was driving Derek's behavior. But understanding his motivation didn't excuse his actions. Being scared doesn't justify what he did, I said. And it doesn't give you the right to show up here and try to guilt me into changing my mind. Carol was quiet for a long moment. What if I could convince Derek to apologize? What if he came to his senses and realized what a mistake this has all been? The question caught me off guard. Part of me, the part that still remembered loving Derek, wanted to believe that reconciliation was possible. But too much had happened. Too many lines had been crossed. It's too late for that, Carol. Your son chose his sister over his wife and child. Some things can't be fixed with an apology. Carol's shoulders sagged. So I'll never see my grandchild? Never be part of his life? The pain in her voice was real, and I felt a stab of sympathy for this woman who was collateral damage in Vanessa's schemes. But sympathy didn't mean I was going to put myself or Lucas at risk. That's not my decision to make right now, I said carefully. My focus is on protecting my child and building a safe life for us. Everything else is secondary. Carol nodded slowly and turned to leave. She paused at the garden gate and looked back. For what it's worth, Natalie, I think you're going to be a wonderful mother. I just wish things could have been different. After she left, Helen and I sat at the kitchen table with our coffee, both of us shaken by the encounter. Carol's visit had been a reminder that the people who had hurt me weren't cartoon villains. They were flawed human beings who had made terrible choices for complicated reasons. Do you think she was sincere? Helen asked. About some of it, yes. But sincerity doesn't make her safe to be around. She enabled everything that happened, even if she didn't mastermind it. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Caroline's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. Natalie, I have news. Derek filed for divorce this morning. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I had expected them. What are the terms? He's not asking for alimony or property division, which suggests his lawyer advised him to keep things simple. But he is asking for joint custody of Lucas after birth. Can he do that, after everything that happened in court? He can ask, but given the evidence we presented about his involvement in Vanessa's scheme, it's unlikely a judge would grant unsupervised custody. At best, he might get supervised visitation. I felt a complicated mix of relief and sadness. My marriage was officially over, but it had been over in all but name since that dinner at Carol's house. At least now we could move forward with legal clarity. There's something else, Caroline continued. I've been contacted by the district attorney's office. They're considering charges against Vanessa for attempted fraud and conspiracy. Charges? Criminal charges? Based on the evidence we presented and the testimony from the other women she targeted, they have a strong case. The pattern of behavior, the attempts to falsify birth records, the financial coercion, it all adds up to multiple felonies. The thought of Vanessa facing criminal charges felt surreal. This woman who had seemed so powerful, so in control, might actually face consequences for her actions. What does that mean for me? It means you might be called to testify in a criminal trial, but it also means that Vanessa will be too busy dealing with criminal lawyers to bother you anymore. Over the following weeks, my life settled into a new rhythm. I returned to work part-time. Helen insisted I stay in her guest room until after Lucas was born, and Caroline handled the legal complications of my divorce and the criminal investigation. Dr. Henley moved my due date estimate up by a week, saying Lucas was growing ahead of schedule and showing signs of being ready to meet the world. The criminal case against Vanessa moved forward quickly. The district attorney was eager to prosecute what they called, quote, a clear case of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable women. 2 more women came forward with similar stories, and the evidence of a pattern became overwhelming. Derek tried to contact me several times, but I had Caroline handle all communication. Through her, he expressed regret for how things had developed and asked if we could work out custody arrangements amicably. I wasn't ready to deal with him directly, but I agreed to consider supervised visitation once Lucas was born and we had all settled into our new reality. 3 weeks after the court hearing, I was folding baby clothes in Helen's living room when my water broke. The timing was perfect, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday when Helen was home from her volunteer work, and the roads were clear for the drive to the hospital. Dr. Henley was waiting for us at Riverside General, having been alerted by my earlier call. The labor and delivery ward felt like a sanctuary, a place where the only people who mattered were me, Lucas, and the medical professionals helping to bring him safely into the world. Lucas Michael Brooks was born at 8:47 p.m., weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced his arrival to the entire floor. The moment Dr. Henley placed him on my chest, everything else in the world disappeared. This tiny, perfect human being was mine, completely and utterly mine, and no one could ever take that away from me. Helen cried when she held him for the first time, declaring him the most beautiful baby she had ever seen. Dr. Henley pronounced him perfectly healthy and commented on how alert and responsive he was for a newborn. The nurses fussed over him, admiring his thick hair and strong grip. Caroline came by the next morning with flowers and legal documents. "I thought you might want to get his birth certificate filed as soon as possible," she said, pulling out the forms, "just to make everything official." Filling out Lucas's birth certificate was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Under Mother, I wrote my name with bold, confident letters. Under Father, I hesitated for a moment, then wrote Derek's name. Whatever else had happened between us, he was Lucas's biological father, and Lucas deserved to know that truth. The rest of the form was straightforward. Lucas Michael Brooks, born in Riverside, Oregon, to parents who loved him, even if one of them had made terrible choices along the way. Derek showed up on the second day, looking nervous and uncertain. He stood in the doorway of my hospital room, holding a small blue teddy bear, his eyes immediately going to the bassinet where Lucas was sleeping. "Can I see him?" he asked quietly. I nodded, watching carefully as Derek approached his son for the first time. When he looked down at Lucas, his face transformed. All the anger and stubbornness melted away, replaced by wonder and what looked like regret. "He's perfect," Derek whispered, his voice breaking slightly. Yes, he is. Derek looked at me and I saw tears in his eyes. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I know saying it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I was wrong. About everything. I had imagined this moment many times over the past weeks, rehearsing different responses depending on whether Derek was sincere or still trying to manipulate me. Looking at him now, seeing genuine remorse in his expression, I found that most of my anger had been replaced by sadness for what we had lost. Why? I asked simply. Why did you think giving away our child was a good idea? Derek sank into the visitor chair, still holding the teddy bear. I was scared. Terrified, actually. My dad left when I was 10, and I grew up watching my mom struggle to make ends meet. When I thought about being a father, all I could see was the potential for failure. So you thought not being a father at all was better? Vanessa made it sound like I could still be involved, just without the responsibility. She painted this picture of Lucas having everything he could ever want, while I got to be the fun uncle who showed up for birthdays and Christmas. Derek shook his head. It sounds insane when I say it out loud. It was insane. It was also cruel and selfish. I know, and I know that apologizing doesn't undo the damage I've caused. But I want you to know that I see it clearly now. You were protecting our son, and I was trying to give him away. You were being a mother, and I was being a coward. Lucas stirred in his bassinet, making the small sounds that meant he would be waking up soon. Derek watched him with fascination, as if he couldn't believe this tiny person was partly his creation. What happens now? Derek asked. Now you figure out how to be a father, I said. Not a fun uncle, not a weekend visitor, but a real father who shows up and does the work, even when it's hard. Quote, and us? I looked at Derek, this man I had married with such hope and optimism, and felt the final pieces of my romantic feelings for him settle into something more practical. There is no us anymore. But there's Lucas, and he deserves to have both his parents in his life if we can make that work. Derek nodded, accepting the boundary I was setting. I'd like that. I'd like the chance to prove I can be the father he deserves. That's up to you to prove. But Derek, if you ever try to take him from me, or allow anyone else to interfere with my relationship with him, you'll lose the privilege of being in his life permanently. Do you understand? I understand. And Natalie? Vanessa won't be a problem anymore. She's facing serious criminal charges, and Marcus filed for divorce last week. Her life is falling apart. I felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and pity at this news. Vanessa had brought her troubles on herself, but the destruction of her life didn't bring me the joy I had expected. I'm not glad about that, I said honestly. I just want her to leave us alone. She will. Her lawyer advised her to stay as far away from anything connected to this case as possible. Over the following months, Derek and I slowly worked out a custody arrangement that prioritized Lucas's needs above our own complicated feelings. Derek got supervised visits at first, gradually earning more trust and responsibility as he proved his commitment to being a present, reliable father. He moved out of the house he had shared with Carol and got a small apartment closer to Helen's cottage. He started attending parenting classes and therapy, working through the fears and insecurities that had led him to make such terrible decisions. Most importantly, he showed up consistently, proving through actions rather than words that he was serious about being Lucas's father. Carolyn helped me navigate the divorce proceedings, which were surprisingly smooth once Derek stopped listening to his family's advice and started making decisions based on what was best for Lucas. We agreed on child support that reflected Derek's actual income rather than inflated expectations, and we established clear boundaries about extended family involvement. Helen's guest room became Lucas's nursery, with her enthusiastic help. She insisted that we stay as long as we needed, claiming that having a baby in the house had given her new purpose and energy. I started working more hours as Lucas grew older, eventually earning enough to afford my own place while still maintaining the support system that had saved us both. The criminal case against Vanessa ended with a plea bargain. She accepted responsibility for attempted fraud and conspiracy charges, in exchange for a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation. Part of her probation required her to stay away from pregnant women and adoption situations, effectively ending her predatory behavior. Dr. Henley became not just Lucas's pediatrician, but a friend and advocate. She made sure I had access to all the support services available to single mothers and connected me with other women who had faced similar challenges. Through her, I learned that my experience, while extreme, was not unique, and that there were networks of support for women protecting their children from family members who saw babies as possessions to be claimed. On Lucas's first birthday, Helen threw a party in her backyard. Derek came with his new girlfriend, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who treated Lucas with gentle affection without trying to replace me as his mother. Caroline brought her own children, who immediately adopted Lucas as their honorary little brother. Dr. Henley stopped by between appointments, bearing a medical bag full of toys instead of instruments. As I watched Lucas take his first wobbly steps across Helen's lawn, reaching for Derek with complete trust, I realized how far we had all traveled from that terrible night when this journey began. Lucas was walking toward a father who had learned to put his child's needs above his own fears, in a yard belonging to a woman who had opened her home to strangers in need, surrounded by people who had chosen to support and protect us. The hand-knitted hat I had made during my pregnancy sat on Lucas's head, slightly too big but perfectly positioned to protect him from the afternoon sun. It had survived everything, that little blue hat, just as we had survived everything. It was a symbol of the love and protection I had wrapped around my child from the moment I knew he existed, love that no amount of money or manipulation or legal maneuvering could ever break. That evening, after the guests had gone home and Lucas was asleep in his crib, I sat on Helen's porch watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be his father. Thank you for being strong enough to protect him when I wasn't." I looked through the window at my sleeping son, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of perfect health and complete security. Lucas Michael Brooks was going to grow up knowing that his mother had fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself. He would learn that family isn't just about blood relationships, but about the people who show up and do the work of loving and protecting each other. Most importantly, he would never doubt that he was wanted, that he was loved, and that he belonged exactly where he was. No one would ever convince him that he would be better off somewhere else, because his mother had made sure that where he was exactly where he belonged. As the stars came out over Riverside, I whispered the same words I had said every night since he was born. "Sleep well, baby boy. Mama's here. Mama's always going to be here." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.